Good morning. We're going to be starting off today in Isaiah chapter 58. And the title of this sermon, Sinful Worship. Sounds like a weird concept. Because worship, right and true worship before God it's righteous, it's holy, it's a wonderful thing. And when I think of a concept like sinful worship, the first thing that might come to mind is worshiping someone or something other than God. But there are ways that God can be wrongly worshipped, ways that go against his will. You know, one example is in Scripture. It says if you're on your way to worship and you realize that you've wronged somebody, you need to go make that right before you come back and worship. But there are other ways. I mean, you might be worshiping without an authentic heart. We might be worshiping out of obligation or some kind of tradition or ritual without having an authentic heart of worship towards God. And we're going to see how the Israelites were in a form of sinful worship in the way they were fasting. Now look at the Pharisees. All the things that they did, all the practices they had, they knew it all, they did it all by the book, according to them. And that was what they thought of as worship. And Jesus showed them just how wrong they were, just how off the mark they were, just how against God's will it was what they were doing. And here we're going to see it in the fasting that God was speaking out against Israel through Isaiah. Verse 1, "Cry aloud, spare not, lift up your voice like a trumpet. Tell my people their transgression, and the house of Jacob their sins." Now, when you think of a trumpet, that's something big and booming that would rally the people together for whatever reason. Maybe they were rallying together for battle. Maybe it was for some important event or announcement or something like that. But he's really wanting him to boom this out and drive this point home. He doesn't want him to get up in front of the people and say, "Well, you guys, God's not too happy with what you're doing, and we need to make some changes." No, he's saying, boom it out like a trumpet. You need to get these people's attention. If you're walking down the street and you're not paying attention and somebody comes up behind you and blows a trumpet, it's going to get your attention. You're probably about going to have a heart attack. It's like you ever have somebody not paying attention walk in front of your car and you hit the horn just to make them jump just because you're mean like me. I think I've done that to you a couple times, I think. It's like, cry aloud, spare not, lift up your voice like a trumpet. Tell my people their transgressions, and my house of Jacob, and the house of Jacob their sins. Verse 2, "Yet they seek me daily and delight to know my ways, as a nation that did righteousness and did not forsake the ordinance of their God. They ask of me the ordinances of justice, and they take delight in approaching God." Well, that sounds good, doesn't it? I mean, if somebody read that about you, you would think, "Oh, cool, I'm doing the right things. I'm seeking God daily. I'm taking delight in approaching him. I'm not forsaking these ordinances." But that's on the surface. That's how they're making it seem. And he goes on, verse 3, he says, why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen? Why have we afflicted our souls, and you take no notice? In fact, in the day of your fast you find pleasure, and exploit all your laborers. Indeed, you fast for strife and debate, and to strike with the fist of wickedness. You will not fast as you do this day, to make your voice heard on high. Is it a fast that I have chosen? A day for man to afflict his soul? Is it to bow down his head like a bulrush and to spread out sackcloth and ashes? Would you call this a fast and an acceptable day to the Lord? They were going to the temple. They were obeying the laws. They were doing things on paper, right, to a degree. They were fasting. They appeared eager to seek the Lord, but they're abusing people. they're fighting all along the way. And the whole time they're just looking for this pity party. God, why am I doing all this stuff and you're not even noticing? Well, why am I bothering wasting my time fasting if I'm not getting what I want? He says, is this a fast that I've chosen? Is this how I've taught you guys? Didn't I teach you better than this? Is basically what he's saying. But they're using it to put on a show, to put on a pity party. What did Jesus accuse the Pharisees of in teaching people how to pray? Don't go out and make a big spectacle of it just to show off for people. Do it authentically. Do it in private. Not that we have to hide our worship, but it's not to make a performance for other people. And that's what they were doing. They're saying, oh, I'm fasting. Look, I'm so hungry. I'm so good because I'm giving things up. God's going to give me whatever I want. And it says, in fact, you're acting like it's so bad. But he says, in fact, in the day of your fast, you find pleasure. You exploit all your laborers. Because it's just all a show. And it's like, I'm going to make everybody else do everything for me. There's going to be strife and debate. It says you strike with a fist of wickedness. And they're wondering why they're not being heard. They're wondering why he doesn't notice. Like they think that they're fooling God with an unauthentic heart. Like they think that just because I do this thing and he's going to see it, what's in here doesn't matter. It says you will not fast as you do this day to make your voice heard on high. You want me to hear you, you're going to have to do different than this, is what he's saying. Because this is not what I've asked for. This is not the fast that I've chosen. This is not what I have asked you for. True worship goes beyond just observing a ritual. True worship goes beyond just going through the motions or going through a checklist. It goes beyond just doing things that people say to do if your heart's not in it. Or even worse, it's in the wrong place as theirs were. And theirs was just an outward show. But on the inside, their hearts were far from God. And there are people even today that do that on a grand scale. And there may be even moments in our own lives that we might recognize bits of that. But they were putting on an outward show, and their hearts were far from God. About 30 chapters earlier, Isaiah 29:13, therefore the Lord said, inasmuch as these people draw near me with their mouths and honor me with their lips, but have removed their hearts far from me. He's saying basically, they're saying what you would think I would want to hear. They're honoring me with their lips. God is great. But their hearts are distant. And it makes me think of how in the past there have been... The church isn't as popular today in society as it used to be. Christianity, God, are not as popular as they used to be. And a lot of people are against these things today. But in the past, I think there have been a lot of people who put on to be these things or to be for these things or called themselves a Christian just for the sake of it made them look good. They might not know God at all, but say, I'm a Christian because either I agree with that concept or I want to be seen as a good person. It was, right now, a lot of people sway from God and stay far from him because it goes against the popularity contest. And the opposite used to be true. We need to be careful to know that our hearts and our motives are in the right place. I don't want to be the kind of person who says all the right things about God, but my heart's not in it. My heart's not with him. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it came up in conversation again about 700 years later. Jesus speaking to the hypocrites, to the Pharisees, he says, Hypocrites! Well did Isaiah prophesy about you, saying, these people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. He's saying the same thing. Double meanings exist. Multiple meanings exist. When God said that through Isaiah, he was talking to those people at that time. That is what they were doing. You guys you're giving me lip service, but your hearts are far from me. But he was also prophesying, as Jesus said, about the Pharisees. So it was both 100% true back in Isaiah's day, but also prophetic for Jesus' time and beyond, for everyone to be on guard for. And think about the Pharisees, how much they were sticklers for, we need to memorize everything, we need to know every page, and it's almost like they make me think like it was like a lawyer kind of thing to them, like we want to know every detail of the law so we can use it to our advantage a lot of times. And they knew Scripture. They would have known Isaiah. They would have known this entire concept of honoring God with their lips but having far hearts from them. They would have known the concept of the whitewashed tomb that Jesus described them as. And they should have known better, to the point where Jesus shouldn't have had to tell them. So if you think about it, these people that he's addressing through Isaiah, God saw the same way he saw the Pharisees. To give kind of a picture. And these are his people. These are the Israelites. So just to get an idea of how big this problem was, let's turn back a little bit. Let's turn back to the beginning. Let's go to chapter 1 in Isaiah here. Of the just how far their hearts really were from God. Isaiah chapter 1. Isaiah chapter 1, starting at verse 10. And he mentions Sodom and Gomorrah, but he's not talking about Sodom and Gomorrah. He's comparing them to them. He says, hear the word of the Lord, you rulers of Sodom. Give ear to the law of our God, you people of Gomorrah. To what purpose is the multitude of your sacrifices to me, says the Lord? I have had enough of burnt offerings and rams, and of the fat of fed cattle. I don't delight in the blood of bulls, or in the lambs or of lambs or goats. When you come to appear before me, who's required this from your hand? Who asked you to do this? To trample my courts? Bring no more futile sacrifices. Incense is an abomination to me. The new moons, the Sabbaths, and the calling of assemblies, I cannot endure the iniquity and the sacred meeting. Your new moons and your appointed feasts my soul hates. They are trouble to me. I am weary of bearing them. When you spread out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not hear. Your hands are full of blood. Now, all the things that he described that they were doing are things that God called people to do. To make sacrifices, to go to the temple, to worship, to honor Sabbaths. But they were so far from him that it was all just a show. And he's saying, you know what, I'm sick of it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to see it. I don't want your incense. I want you to worship me rightly and not with the sinful worship that you're offering me. And, you know, it almost makes me think, imagine there's a couple. And when they're out around their friends and everything, the man is just super affectionate towards his wife. He's telling everybody how much he cares about her and putting on this great show of how she's the most important thing in the world to him. But she knows, and they both know, that he's cheating on her. And that he doesn't have any respect for her, and that he doesn't really care for her. Every word out of his mouth about how important she is to him is going to disgust her. And that's what's happening with God. These people are like, oh yeah, God's great. We're doing all these things that he's asking us to, and we're celebrating him. But he knows that they are unfaithful in their hearts. And he's like, I don't even want to hear this. Don't sit here and act like you guys are worshiping me when your hearts are so far from me. He's like, I'm not going to hear that. So when you spread out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not hear. Your hands are full of blood. Go back to chapter 58. I'm going to verse 6. Is this not the fast that I have chosen? Because before he said, is this a fast that I've chosen? Is this what I asked you to do? Now he's saying, isn't this what I asked you to do? Isn't this what I really want? Verse 6. Is this not the fast that I have chosen? To loose the bonds of wickedness? To undo the heavy burdens? To let the oppressed go free? And that you break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry? And that you bring your house to the poor who are cast out? When you see the naked, that you cover them and not hide yourself from your own flesh? You know, if you're having an authentic worship and you're authentically growing in God, that's the kind of person you're going to be. The one who's caring for everybody around you. The one who is becoming a better person for the people around you. Not the one who's doing like these guys were and oppressing them and causing problems and fights and strife and abusing their laborers and not having a true heart for God. What's going to happen? Jesus describes a more proper fasting as well. Matthew 6:16 through 18. He said, moreover, when you fast, do not be like the hypocrites with a sad countenance. Okay, first off, we see that describes the people we were just talking about back then. Don't be like the hypocrites with a sad countenance. Don't just be putting on this show, oh, I'm so hungry. I've been fasting so long. For they disfigure their faces that they may appear to men to be fasting. Or surely I say to you, they have their reward. But you, when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, so that you do not appear to men to be fasting, but to your Father who is in the secret place, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. You're doing this for God. You're not doing this so everybody says, look how great they are for doing that. And when you're making a spectacle out of it, as he's describing these people and as these people were doing, you're doing that so you'll be looked at a certain way by man. And the whole while God's looking at your heart. Am I worshiping because God deserves it, because I want to be a better person for him? I want to live a life that he's worthy of. Am I doing it because I want to be that person and I want to be better for others? And I want to be the kind of person who does undo heavy burdens, break every yoke, share bread with the hungry, go out and bring your house to the poor who are cast out, covering the naked. And when you do that, something's going to happen. Verse 8. Then, word then tells me this is conditional. If you do this, then. Otherwise not. But if you do this, verse 8, then your light shall break forth like the morning. Your healing shall spring forth speedily, and your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry, and he will say, I am here. If you take away the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger, and the speaking of wickedness, if you extend your soul to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted soul, then your light shall dawn in the darkness, and the darkness shall be as noonday. And look at verse 11. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your soul in drought and strengthen your bones. You shall be like a watered garden and like a spring of water whose waters do not fail. That is what true and righteous worship, not self-serving, not sinful worship, that is what godly worship leads to. And if I could sum up one verse that we should desire to pray for that has a ton of impact, look at verse 11. The Lord will guide you continually, satisfy your soul in drought, strengthen your bones. You'll be like a water garden, a spring of water whose waters don't fail. Isn't that far more desirable than any self-serving motive could ever fulfill? To have a satisfied soul, to have the Lord guiding us continually, to have the strength that he gives. What else will happen? Verse 12. Those from among you shall build the old waste places. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations, and you shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to dwell in. Those from among you shall build the old waste places. That's not talking about outhouses. We're not going to be building old waste places like that. He's talking about these places that have been laid to waste, that have been destroyed. He's talking about rebuilding what's been broken. And we know that Israel faced destruction so many times and needed a physical and literal rebuilding. But it goes beyond that. It goes beyond fixing up some physical buildings. It's helping to rebuild what's broken inside of us too. Inside of us that's been laid to waste. Inside of us that's been in need of repair, in need of restoration. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations and be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to dwell in. And if you turn away your foot from the Sabbath, verse 13, and what he's saying, in verse 13 here, let me pull up another version real quick. Another version says, if you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath. At first glance, when it says turn your foot from the Sabbath, that almost might sound like walking away from the Sabbath. But what he's saying is, turn away from breaking the Sabbath. Really, it's a turning toward honoring the Sabbath. But it says, if you turn away your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy day of the Lord honorable, and shall honor him, not doing your own ways, nor finding your own pleasure, nor speaking your own words, then you shall delight yourself in the Lord. And I will cause you to ride high on the hills of the earth and feed you with the heritage of Jacob your father. The mouth of the Lord has spoken. Warren Wiersbe writes about this concept and about this passage in the kind of fasting that they were living and the kind of worship that they were living. He says, if in my religious duties I'm doing what pleases me, and if doing it does not make me a better person, I'm wasting my time. My worship is only sin. Fasting and fighting do not go together. Look at verse 4 here. Indeed, you fast for strife and debate and to strike with the fist of wickedness. They were fighting. And that doesn't go with worship. He says fasting and fighting do not go together. Yet how many families walk piously out of church at the close of a Sunday worship service, get in the family car, and proceed to argue with each other all the way home? I heard a preacher say the example one time. He was talking about how, the family will be in church, and you hear, I love the Lord, and we're all happy, and this and that, and then they get to the door, and get in the car! That's an extreme example, but how quickly can we lose sight of where our focus should be sometimes? It says, true fasting will lead to humility before God and ministry to others. We deprive ourselves so that we might share with others and do so to the glory of God. If we fast in order to get something for ourselves from God instead of to become better people for the sake of others, then we've missed the meaning of worship. He said, it delights the Lord when we delight in the Lord. These people weren't delighting in the Lord. These people were excited about the idea of the Lord, or appearing to be authentic in worship, but they weren't truly delighting themselves in the Lord. And instead of a righteous, holy worship, it had become a sinful worship. We need to think about these things. We need to be on guard against them. We need to ask ourselves, am I really dedicating a worthy amount of time and effort in my life to seeking the Lord and to delighting in him and spending time with him and growing in him? I need to ask myself, am I worshiping according to God's will? Am I worshiping as he calls me to? Or am I just filling out a checklist of I did this, this, and this? Well, I showed up to church. Well, I said my prayer this morning. Almost like it's more of an obligation than a joy and a privilege that God honors us with. Do we delight in worship? Do we delight ourselves in the Lord? Are we eager to learn more and more about him? Are we eager to draw close to him? Does it excite us when we think about it? Or do we just get a couple hours in on a Sunday morning so we can feel good about going back to the things that really please us, the things that our hearts really desire, the things which are where our priorities really lie? What matters most to us? And God sees that. He sees our hearts. And if I'm worshiping and he's what matters most in my heart, he sees that. And he takes more delight in that than a million heartless sacrifices and a million heartless prayers. He deserves so much more than we could ever give him. How could we ever cut him short? It's easy to feel like it's hard to make certain sacrifices in life. And sometimes when we think about making a sacrifice, whether it be of our time or our attention or our hearts in worship, sometimes it can seem like more than it really is. But we can never out-sacrifice what God gave us. We can never out-sacrifice the gift he gave us through his son. And there's nothing that I can do for him that he's not worthy of. I need to ask myself, is my worship from a right and holy, authentic place? Or is it a sinful worship that's just going through the motions? And if it is, I need to seek him, and I need to delight in him, and I need to refocus my heart to his will.